Welcome everyone to our program tonight on anti-Semitism. My name is Jenny Kiefer and I'm the chair of the Boston chapter. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. Andrea Heymann is the Associate Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League in Philadelphia. In her current role, Andrea responds to acts of bias, coordinates education, and investigates assistance to law enforcement, develops special events and programs. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Andrea.
Thanks so much, Ginny. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be here with all of you this afternoon, and I really appreciate you taking the time to want to share and learn a little bit more about a topic that is incredibly important these days. So I'm going to just get my slides in order. Can everybody see my slides okay?
We see them.
Yes. All right, beautiful. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to start with a formal presentation about anti-Semitism today and kind of share a little bit more about what the Anti-Defamation League is doing. Then we're going to move into more of a participatory discussion where you all are going to be working with each other in breakout rooms and doing self-facilitation, working with scenarios. And then we are going to bring folks back in and we're going to ask a few groups to share out about their experience, what the scenario is, and more. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's get into the content. So who has heard of the ADL? What do you know about us? ADL is a leading anti-hate organization that was founded back in 1913 in response to an escalating climate of both anti-Semitism and bigotry in the United States. Today, ADL is the first call when an act of anti-Semitism occurs, and it continues to fight all forms of hate and oppression. We are a global leader in exposing extremism, delivering anti-bias education, and fighting hate online and in the real world. ADL's ultimate goal is a world in which no group or individual suffers from bias, discrimination, or hate. So ADL defines anti-Semitism as the marginalization and or oppression of people who are or are perceived to be Jewish based on the belief in stereotypes and myths about Jewish people, Judaism, and Israel. So at its core, anti-Semitism boils down to one simple idea: the Jews are to blame. This slide shows that some of the most common anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes that we have in modern society and in the past. So I'm going to go in and kind of look at what some of these different slides or what some of these different tropes are. All the way to the left, we see the gentleman wearing the derby hat with the Star of David is the trope about power, that Jews have this ability to control, all sorts of really important institutions, things like financial markets, the media, Hollywood, politics, other foreign governments, etc. This is something that is constantly has been utilized both in the past, and we actually see it play out in modern times within things like QAnon, for example, where, a core tenet of the QAnon conspiracy theory is that there is a secret cabal of people who have this puppet shadow government that are really kind of making all of the decisions in the day out and day in of the world. The next trope we have is disloyalty, where, this idea that Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are to the land that they currently reside in. So we unfortunately have seen this in politics, both mentions from Republican and Democratic elected officials making comments about, blanket statements about Jewish people and loyalties, dual loyalties to the state of Israel, or having more loyalty to it. Greed is a pretty obvious one, that Jews are greedy and that they like to benefit from, exploiting other people. We saw this come out, over the course of history. However, most recently, we've seen the greed trope be utilized when the COVID-19 disease was first spreading, and thinking about how pharmaceutical companies and Jews were all profiting off of the virus, as well as, getting the information and the vaccine together. Deicide, this is a little more old school. However, it does pop up typically around Easter time. This is the belief that Jews were responsible for the murder of Jesus. Even though in the early 1960s, the Catholic Church did issue a formal decree saying that this is not true and that church doctrine and Catholic educators should stop spreading that piece of disinformation. But unfortunately, we still see that pop up sometimes around Easter time. The blood libel. This is, this is a trope that dates back all the way to the Black Plague, where Christians would spread rumors about how Jewish people would abduct Christian children and would drain their blood in order to make matzah for the holiday of Passover. So we've seen the blood come up over and over again. This is also mentioned in QAnon theories as well. We have denial. This is concerning the Holocaust. There is an extremely large tenet of people who do not believe that the Holocaust happened, and there are people who actively deny it in various positions of power. As famously as Kanye West talking about how the 6 million is false, and that, there are actually a lot of good qualities about Adolf Hitler when he was on Alex Jones's podcast this past fall. And finally, we have disease. Again, this dates back even to, the times of bubonic plague that, Jews were, responsible for poisoning wells and making people sick during the plague. Again, Jews were also being utilized as the scapegoat as helping spread the COVID-19 vaccine. So while there is a growing problem with overt and conscious anti-Semitism, I apologize for my dog, most anti-Semitism is unconscious and implicit. So just because rhetoric or behavior or policy is not motivated by anti-Semitic intent does not mean it is not anti-Semitic. Just because one does not intend to do harm does not mean harm is caused. So we must always examine intent, form, and impact when we're looking at this. Because of anti-Semitism's chameleon-like nature, the justifications given by anti-Semites for why the Jews should be hated or oppressed or attacked can often appear contradictory. So here, I'll give you a few examples. Jews are blamed for the failures of capitalism and for socialism. Jews are hated for being too pacifistic and unwilling to defend their nation, and then accused of being too militaristic with accusations concerning Israel. Jews are told on the one hand to go back to Israel and Palestine, and on the other hand, they're told to get out of Israel and Palestine. So whatever your worldview, whatever you see the ills in society, I guarantee you that there is a brand of anti-Semitism that conforms to and helps affirm and explain that view that you are currently subscribing to. So anti-Semitism is an ancient and enduring phenomenon. So one of the earliest recorded examples of anti-Semitism can be found in the Old Testament. So this is in the book of Exodus, and the saga begins when a new Pharaoh comes to power and declares, quote, "The people of Israel have become too numerous among us. If there should befall Egypt any war, they will join with our enemies and rise up against us." So this is the ancient trope, again, of Jewish disloyalty, the suspicion that Jews are not loyal to the nation where they're actively residing in. So this is not only one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes, it's also the most widespread one that's utilized even today. So according to our Global 100 survey, nearly a quarter of the American population and more than 4/10 of people worldwide believe that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the country or countries where they currently reside. So this is going to sound a little strange, but anti-Semitism isn't really about Jews. Rather, anti-Semitism is the product of the non-Jewish collective. So the Jew of the anti-Semitic imagination is a caricature, it's a fantasy, it's this construct that the non-Jewish imagination which often reflects on this collective, fears and prejudices and anxieties or feelings of alienation, disenfranchisement of the broader society, which are then projected onto the Jew, Judaism, Zionism, or the Jewish state of Israel. So anti-Semitism is also a racialized bigotry. So Jews are not merely just a religious group, and anti-Semitism is not merely an anti-religious bigotry. The roots of biologic racism and the colonialism it was used to justify are bound up with the history of modern anti-Semitism. So as race and pseudoscience begins to be developed and was publicly embraced in the 18th and 19th centuries, Jews were cast not merely as religious others, but increasingly as racial others. So this biological racist pseudoscience ascribed to Jews not only as racialized physical traits, but also imbued this indifference with a judgment about Jewish character, who Jews were and what they stood for. So the Jew was cast as inherently and biologically predisposed to duplicateness, subversiveness, criminality, of rice, and so on. So this racialized form of anti-Semitism foreclosed any possibility for the Jew to escape their condition through conversion, as their traits were seen as biologically determined and immutable. Anti-Semitism is a canary in the coal mine. So when you study the history of anti-Semitism, you see that it tends to manifest along with a whole host of other anti-democratic and antisocial phenomena. And so authoritarianism and the erosion of democratic norms and institutions, anti-intellectualism and the contempt for scholarship, science, learning, as well as the spread of other forms of bigotry and anti-immigrant bias. We see this today. The sharp increase in anti-Semitism we have documented over the last number of years has been accompanied by the growth of hatred aimed at other marginalized groups. So the assault on democratic institutions and norms, and the proliferation of various kinds of conspiracy theories. So where is this hate coming from? The short answer is it's coming from everywhere. Anti-Semitism has no political home. It can come from the right or from the left, from majority or minority communities. At this point, it's really important for me to just state that ADL is a 501c3 organization, and we do not promote or oppose candidates or political parties. Our analysis is completely apolitical. So just keep in mind that we are not discussing the mainstream political right or left or any other mainstream movement right now. That said, just know that extremists are actively trying to mainstream their hateful ideologies, and they've seen some success actually in recent years. So we'll start with the single deadliest threat to Jews in the United States today, which is extreme right-wing anti-Semitism, predominantly promoted by white supremacists. So characteristics of this form of hate, often proudly and openly anti-Semitic, potentially and actually violent. They're looking at the other, and then we look at the other side, which is extreme left-wing anti-Semitism. And this is a little bit more complex. So the characteristics of this form of hate, it's a lot more nuanced, as it's predominantly focused on the state of Israel. So I just want to make this point that not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic by any means. Just like it's okay for us to debate the policies and the actions of the United States government, it's okay to debate the policies and actions of the Israeli government. However, ADL believes that the criticism of Israel crosses the line into anti-Semitism when it fails Natan Sharansky's 3Ds rule. If it demonizes Israel, delegitimizes the state's right to exist, or holds Israel to a double standard that no other country is held to. So left-wing extremists are often well aware of this line, and they purposefully toe it without clearly crossing it. Left-wing anti-Semites often hide behind their progressive credentials and their stated values of inclusion and respect, which is also known as denialism, something that we mentioned earlier. So denialism also, aside from Holocaust denial, denialism also includes a denial of oppression of Jews. So as we said before, anti-Semitism is always a threat. Even when Jews seem to be doing relatively well in mainstream society, but left-wing anti-Semites do not believe Jews are oppressed or have ever been marginalized, and that Jews actually only enjoy privilege. And so I want to make recommendations about what you can do when you're in these spheres or in these conversations talking about right or left. It's all well and good to talk about bias being from the other group, but where you have the most power is to actually change hearts and minds and to draw boundaries is amongst those who ideologically agree with you. So amongst your own family and your friends. It's far more effective to fight bias and bigotry from within your own group than to try and change the other group and point at them. So we actually just issued a brand new survey back in January called our ADL Survey of Anti-Semitic Beliefs and Attitudes. So this found the belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and tropes nearly doubled since we conducted this survey last in 2019. So this study asked more than 4,000 US adults the extent to which they agreed with different anti-Jewish tropes. And the ADL, we've been conducting this particular survey actually longer than our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which I'm sure you're all aware of or familiar. We've been doing this specific survey since the 1960s. And, to be honest with you, I think the results of this survey are actually a bit more disturbing than the audit, which is also disturbing in its own right. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Approximately 20% of Americans believe in 6 or more anti-Semitic stereotypes, tropes, or conspiracy theories. So this is significantly higher than the 11% that we found back in 2019. And unfortunately, this is the highest level that we've recorded in the past 30 years. So this means that 66 million Americans believe in classic anti-Semitic notions and tropes. So for us and other partners, both inside and outside of the Jewish community, as well as with lawmakers, law enforcement agents, and other, partners and allies that exist, this research contains many important insights for understanding and preventing and combating anti-Semitism. All of ADL's reports are available online for you to read for free. You're able to download them. So, they're a little bit hefty sometimes, but they're all available and free for the general public. So as we dig a little bit deeper into the data gathered in our survey, we also found that basic knowledge about the Holocaust is severely lacking in the general US population, and especially among younger Americans. Nearly 6 out of 10 Americans under the age of 30 could not accurately identify how many Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Most Americans cannot accurately identify the number either. Nearly 1 in 4 say that they don't know, and more than 1 in 5 significantly underestimated the number of Jews murdered. So in the era where preserving the memory of the Holocaust is becoming paramount, research suggests that Holocaust education plays an incredibly important role in fighting back against anti-Semitism. So respondents who correctly answered that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust believed in the fewest anti-Jewish tropes, only 3.2 on average, compared to 7.3 for those who underestimated the number of Jews murdered at 1 million or fewer. So anti-Semitism often manifests as a conspiracy theory or a set of conspiracy theories that puts Jews as the secret masterminds behind any number of social, political, economic, theologic, or environmental problems, real or perceived. Generally, this has to do with notions that Jews have this inordinate, almost supernatural power, which they wield to harm non-Jews. So while there is a growing problem with overt and conscious anti-Semitism as exhibited by white supremacists and other anti-Semitic movements, most anti-Semitism is unconscious and implicit. So like other forms of bigotry, anti-Semitism is pervasive and systemic. It is part of the air that we breathe, and often we aren't even conscious that we've been infected by it. Because anti-Semitism is systemic, it operates independent of anti-Jewish animus or feelings of hostility towards Jews. So just because rhetoric or behavior or policy is not motivated by anti-Semitic intent does not mean it isn't anti-Semitic. Just because one does not intend to do harm does not mean no harm is done. So we must always, again, examine intent, form, and impact. And I know that I mentioned this earlier, but it really is such an important point to stress. So as I mentioned, we also have been conducting an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. They unfortunately surged in 2022 to historic levels with a grand total of 3,697 incidents reported. So this was an increase of about 36% compared to 2021. And that was also a record-setting year. So if we think about that, on average, that's approximately 10 anti-Semitic incidents happening per day. And again, this was the highest number that we've recorded since we've been tracking this data since 1979. So ADL monitors extremism across the ideological spectrum. Our staff of investigators, analysts, researchers, and technical experts strategically monitor, expose, and disrupt extremist threats, both on the ground and online. So this slide just kind of shows, normally right now the trendy thing is right-wing, white supremacist, neo-Nazi kind of stuff, Ku Klux Klan. But, we deal with a lot of different other groups. We have Odinists, we have Holocaust denial, Black nationalists, Islamists, etc. So we have a lot of different research analysts who really cover the full spectrum of extremism. So white supremacist propaganda, which allows extremist groups to disseminate hateful messages and gain attention with little risk of public exposure, has been on the rise in the United States for the past several years. So we have been putting out a report called our White Supremacist Propaganda Report, and we just released it in March. So the report shows that in 2022, incidents of white supremacist propaganda distribution reached, you can believe it, another all-time high. So incidents with this kind of propaganda is not just anti-Semitic. We also see racism, anti-LGBTQ sentiments. They don't just use flyers, they also use stickers. They'll throw a sheet banner over an interstate highway. They'll use graffiti, posters, and as recently as laser projections and drone technology, which I'll talk about in a little bit. There was a 38% increase in incidents from the previous year, which we had a total of 6,751 cases reported to us compared to the 4,876 that were reported to us in 2021. So incidents of anti-Semitic propaganda more than doubled. So in 2021, we had only 352 incidents. And then in 2022, we had 852 incidents. So this is the highest number of white supremacist propaganda that we've ever recorded. Propaganda was reported in every single US state except Hawaii. The highest levels of activity were Texas, Massachusetts, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, California, Utah, Florida, Connecticut, and Georgia. So just to a little bit of background information, when we get a report of a white supremacist propaganda distribution, usually what happens is, let's say somebody goes around and throws a few hundred flyers over a few different streets in a neighborhood. We don't count it as an incident per piece of paper. If it's okay, it's only happened in this neighborhood, that's one incident. So just want to make sure that we are not inflating the numbers based on how many pieces of paper. This is based on, sometimes the reports come in over a 2 or 3 day period, depending on how large the area is. So just wanted to, make that very clear to everybody. And so we really do recommend that if you do see people who are distributing propaganda, whether somebody hands you a flyer directly, or if you see somebody out on the street doing this, we don't suggest confronting the individual. Instead, we really encourage you to contact local law enforcement and to report that this is actively happening. Again, we're here to support, communities after a flyering. And so, we want to make sure that everybody stays safe. So just please keep that in mind if you do encounter this in the wild. So I just wanted to kind of uplift two of the extremist groups that have been kind of dispensing the most amount of propaganda that we've been seeing. So this group, Patriot Front, they're a white supremacist group, and their members maintain that their ancestors conquered America and bequeathed it to them and nobody else. So since 2019, Patriot Front has been responsible for majority of the spread of white supremacist propaganda distribution in the US. So they define themselves as American fascists or American nationalists, and they are focused on preserving America's identity as a European American one. So Patriot Front's graphics typically feature the upright fasces, which is a weapon in the top left corner with the stars all around it. It's often circled by the circle of 13 stars, or it's placed on the breast of an eagle, kind of giving a similar imagery associated with the US government. So Patriot Front frequently posts flyers and handbills in very public areas, and they oftentimes include a lot of anti-immigrant sentiments and other themes. So Patriot Front was formed by disaffected members of another white supremacist group called Vanguard America. And so they split off from Vanguard America in 2017. In September in 2017. And that was basically about a month after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. So a very large shift in the white supremacist movement. After Unite the Right, there was a lot of splintering and a lot of new groups that were formed after that rally. Another major group that has popped up recently is called the Goyim Defense League, or the GDL. And they are a loose network of individuals connected by their deep anti-Semitic beliefs. So they attract a range of anti-Semites and white supremacists, and they're best known for their anti-Semitic stunts and schemes to troll or harass Jewish people. So members engage in anti-Semitic flyering and banner campaigns, and they have something called Name the Nose Tour, where they drive around the country and kind of harass Jewish people and talk about, different big noses in Hollywood. So they operate what's called Goyim TV. This is an online video platform focused exclusively on producing anti-Semitic content. If you recall, after the hateful messages by Kanye West, members of GDL projected his words, Kanye was right about the Jews, on the 405 freeway in LA, which you see here. And they also did this as well at the University of Florida and University of Georgia football game. And so we'll talk about that college football game in a moment. So what the heck are we doing? There's so much going on, this tsunami, it's insane. What are we doing about it? So here we go. The recent outburst of anti-Semitism from Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, has led some to argue that all he is looking for is attention, and therefore we should just ignore the absurdity. But unfortunately, there are too many factors at work, which makes such a strategy unrealistic. So his willingness to engage in blatant anti-Semitism encourages other extremists to act out. So here what we have on the slide, as I mentioned, the GDL was responsible for displaying some anti-Semitic rhetoric on projected by lasers outside of the stadium at a major college football game. In the top left corner, you see this is a joint response issued by both the universities of Florida and Georgia. And then you actually see another mention from President Biden. You see here, to us, this is an incredible statement because they call out exactly what the hatred is. They condemn it. They talk about how they are standing united together with the Jewish community at their respective campuses, and that they're standing together against hate. And these are so, so important. And you see here, President Biden also says, I want to make a few things clear. The Holocaust happened. Hitler's a demonic figure. Instead of giving a platform to political leaders, we should be calling out and rejecting anti-Semitism wherever it hides. There should be absolutely no wavering in response to incidents. Our leaders have to shine a light on anti-Semitism and rally their communities to action in a timely way. So we're not going to win the battle of hearts and minds or end anti-Semitism or racism or other forms of hate without an all of society approach. So this includes, the individuals, corporate leaders, faith-based leaders, government folks, and community leaders of all types have to stand up and denounce hate anytime that it comes up in your respective communities. So According to the FBI's most recent hate crimes report, 55% of religion-based hate crimes targeted the Jewish community. So fighting bigotry with hate crime laws and improving hate crime data is really necessary in order to understand and help change this ongoing situation. So what we have here on this slide, this is a sample of a flyer that was distributed by the Goyim Defense League. As you can see here, it says, "Let's go, Brandon." Every single aspect of the Biden administration is Jewish, where they publicly out people. They put stars of David and flags of Israel next to them. And then you also see them uplifting their video platform, Goyim TV, and it's easy enough to access with a QR code on a smartphone. So ADL put together our Protect Plan, which recommends the following steps that Congress and other legislative bodies should take: prioritizing and preventing and countering domestic terrorism, resourcing according to the threat, opposing extremists in government service, taking domestic terrorism prevention measures, ending the complicity of social media in facilitating extremism, creating an independent clearinghouse for online extremist content, and targeting foreign white supremacist terrorist groups. So each year, ADL conducts a survey of hate and harassment online as well. So our most recent survey found that harassment remains unacceptably prevalent despite platforms' best efforts to curb it. So marginalized groups, including Jews, women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community experience online harassment based on their identity at disproportionately higher levels. So an overwhelming majority of Americans agree that the laws around online hate need to be strengthened. So ADL's repair plan addresses many manifestations of online hate, including online harassment, anti-Semitism, racism, extremist disinformation, and domestic terrorism. So with this plan, we're really hoping to push hate and extremism back into the fringes of the digital world. So ignorance is dangerous and it's very powerful. If we want to eliminate hate and bigotry, we must offer programs that emphasize the threat of anti-Semitism by promoting an understanding of who the Jewish people are today and making sure that we include anti-Semitism in anti-bias and DEI trainings. ADL has a collection of free online lesson plans and resources to help educators and families. These include things like lesson plans, table talks, conversation guides, curated books, bullying and cyberbullying resources. We also have an amazing school program called No Place for Hate, which is designed to improve school climates, to combat things like bullying and bias and hatred. And it helps teach students to move out of a bystander role into an ally role. So we also do a lot of anti-bias workshops for community groups and nonprofits, and we also do peer training programs for high school and middle school students. So from the Tree of Life synagogue shooting to everyday harassment on college campuses, members of the Jewish community are targets for hate crimes and bias incidents. Policymakers must take steps to protect the security of these communities by protecting their physical safety. On the map, this is an image of the recent Boston mapping project that happened last year. And this was created as a disturbing and anti-Semitic call to dismantle and disrupt the Boston Jewish community. The online portal created, it named approximately 400 Jewish organizations in Massachusetts and blamed Jewish people for many of the world's problems, including racism and colonization. So unfortunately, the United States is not an outlier when it comes to anti-Semitism or violence or hate. ADL works closely with Jewish communities and governments and other non-governmental organizations and other stakeholders in Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and beyond. We promote Jewish security worldwide, and we support a secure Jewish and democratic state of Israel. All right, so we are about to start a breakout room session. So as Ginny and Ann help start putting people into specific groups, I just wanted to lay out a few group agreements for our conversation. It's really important that when discussing these things, that we're talking about things like identity. So I just wanted to lay a few ground rules to keep in the back of our minds for today. Respect, approach this workshop and the conversations that we're going to be engaging in with respect for yourself and your peers. Make sure to use I statements, participate. We want everyone, speak from your own experience. We want everyone to participate today because these trainings are only as good as you make them. So, I know I came in as a lecturer here, but again, we really want to try to make this an interactive learning component right now. Please show some empathy, listen to your peers when they share, show compassion for their experiences, and please don't be afraid to share yours as well. Give space and get space. We want to make sure that if you're the kind of person who really likes to talk, and you notice in your group that maybe there are 2 or 3 other people who haven't shared out yet, maybe, take a step back and maybe reach out to them and see if they would like to, share some feedback. Confidentiality, we're going to make these Las Vegas rules here. What happens in here stays in here. So whatever is shared in here today must remain confidential. Please, feel free to take the lessons from today into the world and share them with people, but just make sure that you're not sharing total specifics. And then finally, I just wanted to uplift a really important tool to also keep in the back of your mind as we're going through our scenarios today. This is a really, really popular teaching tool that we use in trainings. It's called our pyramid of hate. So if you look at the bottom of start at the bottom of the pyramid, if we allow biased attitudes to go unchecked, they become normalized and people can start acting on those attitudes. And when individual acts of bias go unchecked, they too can become normalized and societies can start adopting systemic discrimination policies. And when discrimination goes unchecked and becomes normalized, it allows for more and more vicious individual and systemic expressions of hate to become possible. So the good news is that we can interrupt the escalation of hate before it goes too far. Each level of the pyramid requires specific and targeted intervention. So as we see at the lower levels of the pyramid, we want to meet words and ideas with counter speech and education. The middle levels require more community organizing and targeted advocacy. And of course, at the highest levels, we must hold our leaders accountable in society. So we must prepare ourselves to respond to acts of bias, even if they're unintentional. So again, keep these things in mind as you go through your workshop today. ADL recommends that you respond proportionately and clearly, meet words and ideas with counter speech, and if you feel safe, interrupt the incident and support the target. All right. So now we are going to, I have a few, actually here, we're going to do, I'm going to share these before we go in as well. These might help you also think about how you frame some of these scenarios. So these are some speak up strategies when you're going through potentially some of these things. Assume good intent and explain impact. Oftentimes people don't mean to be offensive and are quick to correct their words and actions if they're engaged respectfully. So one of my favorite things to do if I find myself in a situation where somebody says something problematic, I'll ask a question, saying something like, what did you mean by that? Or can you explain to me what your rationale is behind that statement or that theory? Educating about, excuse me, educating about anti-Semitism, showing how lines can get crossed, making things universal, saying things are complicated. So with that, we are going to start splitting everybody up into groups. So please be mindful and be a little bit patient. We are going to be copying and pasting scenarios for everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And so again, we're going to go in. Oh, glad to see that we have so glad that so many folks did not get lost in the transition from breakout room to out of breakout room, back into rooms. So thank you all for bearing with all of our complicated tech. So just for the sake of time, we are only going to ask 2 groups. And if we have time, we'll ask one more group to present to us. So I am going to call on group number 1. I am going to share my screen so that everybody can see the scenario that you were working with. And then I will ask you to unmute yourself and just share out with the good of the group. Can everybody see? Let me just put mine on current slide. All right, can everybody see the scenario that breakouts room 1 and 2 are responsible for, but only group 1 will be sharing out? Do we have identified speaker? Group 1?
Or group 2 even.
Or group 2 even. If somebody just from one of the groups, we found that this scenario was really, really useful. So anybody from either of those groups, would you like to kind of talk about what your process was like?
And you can just unmute and talk since we can't see you all.
Okay, I will speak. My name is Mara Holt. I'm from Ohio. We had a good discussion. When it started out, we just were at a loss for words, had no idea. But then we came to the conclusion that the coach should be talked to, probably by the parents of the kids. And there was some concern that, the coach may also not be educated about anti-Semitism. And so the parents should be prepared to educate the coach in a non-hostile way. And that if the coach could then talk to the coach of the other team, then that coach could deal with his team either in a public assembly or talk to the parents of the boy who made the slur. But we agreed that something needed to happen. It shouldn't be let go.
Great. That was really, really well done. I commend you for that really great review and kind of, sharing kind of thoughts about things. I think your suggestions were excellent. Is there anybody else from either of these groups that wanted to
Yes.
share anything?
Yes.
Please.
So in addition to that, I think there was also a sentiment that depending on the age and personality of the boy that this happened to, that perhaps he should speak to the coach. So it wasn't necessarily the grandparent or the parent, but also that someone should have a conversation with him about what happened and how he might be able to respond in the future, whether anything like this had happened before, and probably put it in a little bit broader context.
Excellent, excellent, excellent points. I really like that. Anybody else? One more, we'll take one more comment from this group, and then I'll kind of share my thoughts and opinions on what some ADL practices would be for this scenario. Anyone else? Okay.
We thought it would be handled very well if they had Ted Lasso as coach.
I love that. I love that. So I know this is a really messed up one, but honestly, this happens a lot more than you think it might. We have a kid who was saying, awful things, but they were also bullying them throughout the entire game. And the grandson is concerned about seeing and playing this kid again in a couple of weeks. So, one of the things that immediately I think about, especially in community leagues, is oftentimes we have to sign waivers and we have to sign lots of paperwork a lot of times when it comes to being involved in community activities. And oftentimes those align with how you act and how you behave, that there's a code of conduct. And so that is something that is stressed a lot in sports. And so that is something that sometimes people don't think about that. But children who are involved in these things usually have to sign up, and they usually have to sign these kinds of codes of conduct. And if those things are broken, they need to be dealt with. So, I definitely think that it would be appropriate for the parent or the guardian of the child to approach the coach. Sometimes, when ADL, that would be if the parent or the guardian is taking this on directly. Sometimes if ADL is getting involved, we're the kind of organization that we don't deal with low level things. We will go straight to the top. So whether it's, the entire, overseer of that particular section of the league or the top of that league, like we go to the top and we immediately say something. But if this is something that's being kept directly, but if this was just like reported to us just to document it and the parents really wanted to handle this, number one, speaking with the coach, and stressing that this is really problematic, and that there needs to have some kind of punishment. And again, community leagues are different than schools. Oftentimes schools in school situations have a lot of privacy laws in place that, if a child is a perpetrator and does commit an act against another child, that you may not find out what that punishment is. But those rules are not nearly as severe in a community league. So whether that child who did commit those acts, whether they have to sit out the rest of this season, whether they have to, do some kind of educational programming, if they have to go sit through ADL's online anti-Semitism course, whatever it might be, having some kind of proactive and educational response is really, really important. And sometimes this actually inspires teams to consider and think about learning on lots of other subjects, that that anti-Semitism isn't the only one. We see a lot of racist acts and racist comments that are made in sports leagues, also things amongst the some anti-LGBTQ sentiments. So that's kind of, the different ways that if a parent or guardian would handle this situation versus if ADL was acting on behalf of the family. But this is definitely problematic, definitely want to hold the league accountable, and also want to implement some kind of educational response, for obviously the perpetrator, as well as, maybe the entire rest of the team. Okay, so now we are going to transition over to group number 7. This was also a popular topic amongst the organizers of this program. So I'm curious if anybody from group number 7 or group number 8 wants to unmute and share any thoughts or sentiments that you had when discussing this particular scenario.
Again, you can just unmute and speak up because we can't see everybody.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My
Could you
thought,
tell us the scenario first?
So the scenario should be on the screen. I hope everybody can still see the slides. So it's traveling for business with your boss and your boss's boss who does not know that you're Jewish. After the meeting with the client, your boss's boss makes an anti-Jewish remark about the client. What do you do?
Okay, thank you.
my own feeling, right or wrong, of course, is I would have at least found a way to ask a question without too much judgment. I'm curious about why you said that, or something like that.
Great. I love utilizing that. That is an excellent way of, approaching the subject delicately without, and you're really putting it on them to kind of explain in their own words. That is such a powerful move, and it's a very, very safe, non-confrontational option as well for folks who might be, a little more nervous in this situation. Anybody else want to unmute and share if you were in group 7 or 8 about this scenario?
I'm wondering why someone said, it said that who does not know you are Jewish. I don't think it matters one way or the other. I think it's everybody's responsibility when confronted with any kind of anti-Jewish or any kind of anti remark to say something no matter what.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for this particular scenario, our staff felt that sometimes people, will think twice about what they say if they have certain pieces of information. So, but that's really good feedback. I really appreciate that.
Can I say something? I
Please,
have
absolutely.
two comments. I had a friend who was Jewish and was in a lot of business meetings with people. And she always made it a point somehow, when she got into the meeting, to reference that she was Jewish, so she wouldn't have to get into this kind of bullying or whatever. And another, can I go back to the other baseball one? My husband's a baseball umpire.
Okay.
And he said in Massachusetts, they have a rule, it's called the taunting rule.
Mhm.
And if anybody does, any kid taunts another kid with whatever, they can be thrown out of the game
Ah,
and not be let back in again for the whole season.
okay. Well,
So-
that is great, because that definitely does not happen where I live in Philadelphia or in New Jersey and in parts of Delaware. So, again, I think that's a really great point, and I'm really glad to hear that Massachusetts has taken that
Is that right?
that problem very seriously. And I wish that other states would do the same. Anybody else want to share any thoughts about this scenario, about traveling with your boss? Anybody think about, something, I'll just throw this, into the mix. When I do this topic with young professionals, a lot of times people will utilize the HR route instead of confronting somebody directly. So we have to think about power dynamics here sometimes. So, especially if you're somebody who's fresh out of school, maybe this is your first real job, and this is a big deal to be going on a business trip with your boss and your boss's boss. And thinking about that power dynamic, sometimes, I've had people tell me that they've experienced this, and in that moment, they just completely froze. They were so scared that if they said something head on, they wanted to, but they were so scared that there would be ramifications or that there would be punishment for something like this. So I also throw that idea put that into your head as well, thinking about, depending on where you are in your career, that might also impact the way that you respond in that situation too. Whether this was your, first day on the job or something like that. So, for the sake of time, this is again, again, thinking about power dynamics. If you feel empowered to speak up and say something directly, that is incredible. I think that there are also ways for, to utilize things like HR departments. I know, sometimes in small businesses that's not an option, unfortunately, if you're your own business owner. There are also organizations that do get involved in this. We have gotten a little bit more involved in workplace discrimination issues. That can be a little bit tricky. But there are also government agencies and other nonprofits that, sometimes if there are groups that do this work as well, we are more than happy to, partner and have them help us, especially if this is more of their expertise. But yes, approaching the subject head on, and hopefully that they understand that is a problematic comment, and that they'll take that and it'll be a lesson for them.
Can I say something?
Please.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Yes, we can.
I'm thinking about the basketball player and the scenario that we just did. I mean,
Okay.
I think that yes, those agencies are there, HR is there, coaches are there, parents and guardians, everybody's there, the league rules. But, at its heart, I believe it's strongly in empowering children and teaching children as much as possible, as much as we can, about, this sounds Pollyannish, but getting along, bullying about each other and differences.
Mhm.
Whether so that woman or man or whoever was traveling with that boss who said that, I get it totally about freezing and not knowing what to say. I get it. But as a 10-year-old girl, perhaps a 15-year-old girl, if she had been more assertive, and I'm not pointing the finger at her, but that we make these conversations part of our lives, all the time, whether it's through our faith communities or our schools or our boys and girls clubs or what boys and girls, whatever it is. That I think even through, we have to, because we can't always turn to a bigger source, a more powerful source. And then, there's often, whether they're supposed to be or not, whether it's from HR or from the, the league or the coach, that puts a person in a position to get more bullied in some ways.
Absolutely. No, I those are really excellent points. I appreciate you sharing them. Again, we do a lot of trainings, and you're right that children are very smart, and if you approach these subjects in age appropriate ways, primarily through conversations, having a meal and talking about this stuff around the dinner table can be really impactful. And again, we don't expect everybody to know these things. I mean, I do this professionally. So that's why, we have a team of educators, an entire team of people who write curriculum, write these conversation starters, write these lesson plans, again, all available for free on our website. And a lot of these tackle things, about how to respond to a bias incident in school, something that, you as a grandparent or a loved one or a trusted adult that, you may not be like a trained expert like myself, but this will give you a step-by-step way in how to manage and handle these conversations if you have people in your life that this happens to. So I want to ask Anne and Ginny, how are we doing on time?
So I'm going to suggest we come back to the whole group. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're at our 6:15, but Andrea's agreed to stay a little longer if people want to talk a little more or ask questions. If you need to go, that's fine. If you would like to stay, that's fine as well. There was one question in the chat. Unfortunately, it went away when we went into breakouts, but the person who asked it was asking about seeing a Stop Brandon flag and wondering, should I report that? And if so, who would I report that to? I don't know if that person is still on and wants to elaborate any, but that was a question that someone had asked before breakout.
So that's a great question. We know that the Let's Go Brandon stuff is definitely problematic. It's not connected to any specific domestic terrorist or extremist group per se. Again, we also have to be mindful about where you see these things. This is one of the hardest challenges that I have when I talk to a constituent who, let's say their neighbor is flying a Let's Go Brandon or a Nazi flag right next door to them. And unfortunately, I have to tell them it's protected. It's freedom of expression. These are things that we may not like it. We may not agree with it, but they have as much of a right to fly that outside versus if you're flying a pride flag or an American flag or a Black Lives Matter flag or whatever flag it is. So I know it can be hard. I mean, I always tell people, if you think it looks weird, it's better to report it and then leave it up to either law enforcement or somebody like myself to make the distinction. And we'll let you know, like if something is problematic, we'll definitely respond back to you. And there are people, my colleagues in our Boston office are very, very good at this. But it's always better to be safe than sorry. And again, I mentioned that we have a crazy resource called our hate symbol database. And this is and we also have a glossary of hate terms and extremist terms. These are constantly being updated, by our research analysts and, our expertise so that you all can become better nuanced in, kind of identifying these symbols in the wild or knowing that if something is. So I hope that answers that question for whoever asked, and I appreciate it. I see Helene, are you you're raising your hand?
Yeah. I have to go, but I want to say thank you. It was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you to Ginny as well. And is it possible to get your contact information?
Yes, if you want, I can, is it okay, Ginny? I can give you all my contact info and then you can pass it along to the rest of the group. I'm happy to give out my email and our phone number.
So after the session, I'm going to send to all participants a recording of it and I'll include that with it. So
all right, excellent.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Helene.
Any
I would-
final comment, question anyone wants to make before we?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
And that is, how do you feel about throwing the comment back at the person who made it and say something to the effect of, well, why did you say that? Or what did you mean by that? And giving them an opportunity either to realize that they shouldn't have said it and be a little embarrassed, or to explain themselves. I mean, is that a worthwhile approach?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that is by far one of the best ways to help de-escalate a situation if it's getting really heated, because what you're doing is that you're putting it on that person to
Yeah.
tell you exactly what they're saying. You're not asking what they heard on the talking head on the TV or on the podcast. Like, they said it. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate in your own words? Like why you said this or why you believe this? Like, I really want to know. And I think that is a great way to like disarm somebody and really
Yeah.
putting it back on them to explain themselves. And I think that that's just a good way, especially if you are a little nervous about confronting somebody in a situation like that. This is a really, really great, milder approach to kind of helping bring the temperature down a little bit in the room if it's getting a little.
That's good to know. Thank you. Because what I sense is oftentimes people make an offensive comment, anti-Semitic or anti-whatever, and they don't even really know what they're saying. They've just, sort of heard it, or, they make this comment without really thinking through, what am I really saying?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I know people they really don't understand some of the things that they say or that they hear. So that does happen a lot these days.
I wanted to add that for any of the folks who've done some of the racial justice workshops, and we talk about standing up and speaking out and the different techniques, though this one about asking them to clarify is also important, because when they hear themselves say it, that helps them sort of see it better. So if someone has blurted something out and you're then saying, could you clarify what you mean by that? They have to take a pause and self-reflect, and that can be very powerful. Any other final last comment, last question from anyone? I think someone else had their hand up. No.
Brenda.
I'm sorry, I don't see you.
Brenda did.
Oh, Brenda, go ahead. You can be our wrap-up person. Go ahead.
Maybe this is a good wrap-up question. We have all these different marginalized groups and everybody's doing their own thing. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can all come together. I'm coming out of the LGBTQ community. We've done a lot with racial justice. I've done a lot of reading on Native American, and now we've got the anti-Semitism. Is there anybody trying to pull us all together to come to a common goal against them?
Oh,
Great question.
I love that question. I think we're getting better at it. I really think we're getting better at it. You're right that we are so much more powerful as marginalized communities when we band together, because at the end of the day, white supremacists hate everything about all of these groups. Yeah. So whether it's the LGBT or Black folks or Jewish folks, like, I think Jews are still like the most hated out of those groups, but like, it's still like, this is a common enemy here. And so, I think something that I think about, especially with the mission of ADL, that even from the get-go, that, even though it's a Jewish rooted organization and to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all, like that part of the mission was always there. It wasn't added on later after, desegregation or civil rights or whatever it is that, we have to, you can't fight one form of oppression without addressing and fighting all the other forms of oppression that exist. And so, I think about how in our Center on Extremism, we started tracking and realizing that, anti-LGBTQ sentiments have always been there, but in terms of like really organized efforts, whether through legislation or through extremist and domestic terrorist activity or TikTok or whatever it is, we saw that there was a gaping hole in our extremism work. And so we reached out to our partners at GLAAD, and now we are sharing the first ever anti-LGBTQ plus analyst who she is tracking this data exclusively. She has done a lot of reporting and work on this. And so I think, again, you know, all these things take time. And so I think that, you know, things like our Black Jewish Alliance groups that are trying to, you know, build bridges locally with the respective Black and Jewish communities across the country. I think about our intentional work of working with the Hispanic and Latino community. I know that that was, you know, we've always have been fighting for immigration, but I think that that came to a forefront after Uvalde and what happened in El Paso. So unfortunately, when tragedy strikes, that kind of helps get things onto people's radars even more so, but there's always room for improvement. But, you know, we are working with lots of folks like the ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, lots of reproductive rights groups and LGBTQ groups and immigration and anyone who's fighting back against white supremacy. So thank you for that question. And I really appreciate everybody's, you know, paying attention and being so engaged. And I really hope that you all learned a lot from our session today, and hope to maybe keep in touch with some of you if you ever need anything. You have a friend in the Philly office down here, but I'm also, if you would like to get more involved or hear more about ADL in your neck of the woods, I'm happy to connect you with some of my regional colleagues in the Boston area, or if you're in other parts of the country, you know, we have 25 offices across the country, and we would be more than happy to connect you.
So on that note, thank you so much, Andrea. This was very insightful, lots of information. I'm sure there was a lot of good conversation. Thank you to all of you for coming. This was probably our last speaker series for Boston until the fall. So thank you so much for coming and participating. And please consider the civil rights trip. A few more seats left we'd love to fill. So have a wonderful weekend. And again, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Ginny, thank you again.
Welcome.
Be good, everybody.
Bye, Steph.